Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Spartan Hoops. I'm your host, David Klein, here today with my co-host, Greg Waddell, at GWizzy12 on Twitter. Before we get started, we got a couple things we want to push. Now on Spartan Hoops, we have Julius Marble, and all the rest of the front court players are up, kind of completing generally an overview of kind of the seasons that they had last year, what we think is maybe going to happen heading into this next year. And this is going to be the focus of the episode. And Greg has actually had the good luck of recently connecting with Jeff Goodman. He came on to his podcast on Sleepers Media. Great episode. I listened to part of it. I'm looking forward to finishing the rest of it this week. So please make sure you drop him a follow both at GWizzy12 as well as Sleepers Media and give that episode a listen because good stuff all around. Really happy for you. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. Yeah, thanks for the little plug at the top. We've randomly been getting some love from Mr. Jeff Goodman, who is obviously quite a polarizing figure, but everyone who loves college hoops has probably read his thoughts in some form over the years. So yeah, he came on the show. It was an awesome conversation. He also broke the Coach K news like 3 days after we agreed to set this up. So it was kind of crazy timing, but it turned out to be a really fun conversation. Sleepers Media channel, you can find all that stuff. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight, DK. We've got some Michigan State stuff to get into.
I know. I mean, we're in June here. First day of practice hits. They put out the hype video. I was hyped. You know, in season, I like to believe that I'm always an extremely rational person. When I have the film in front of me, I try to look at my team as rationally, as reasonably as can be. But in the offseason, I'm all about the hype. I absolutely am. Marcus Bingham looked like he put on a few extra pounds. We say it every season, but he was, going to war with Matty Sissoko in some of these drills. I don't know, man. I just love it. I love the possibility, the potential of what can be. I think that that's some of the most exciting parts of college hoops, just to see these guys grow and develop over the years. And for the season that we had last year and the up and downs that we had, I'm just cautiously optimistic. I'm trying not to overpress my excitement about the potential of this team, but I really think if things fall into place, which it's an if, it's a big if, they can have a big bounce back year, and I think really kind of just round out towards the end of the season, maybe have something exciting. So what are you just generally thinking this offseason? We hear the Coach K news. Obviously, my first train of thought is, Jim Boeheim and Tom Izzo are kind of those next two that are probably in the line in the Hall of Fame, kind of following in the footsteps of both Roy Williams as well as Coach K. They're probably on the latter part of their careers. And I think we had some brief discussions in regards to whether Tom Izzo had X amount of years left. I think that some of what we saw come out in some of the interviews that he's done, he usually makes a circuit for various podcasts, and he's not quite sure. He hasn't given us a timetable, but I think that we both feel somewhere between maybe the end of this class coming in 3 to 4 years, maybe 5. I think that that's a reasonable expectation. And I think we probably are both on the same page that, similar to UNC and Duke, the successor is probably already in the program. I would expect DJ Stevens to be tapped. What are your thoughts on Coach K, I guess, going out, and where do you see with Tom Izzo maybe being the next in line?
Yeah, so the Coach K news came as a shock to me, and I think every big college basketball fan. You knew it was going to come at some point, but it was still such a jarring thing to just like open Twitter and read. So I am excited to see what happens to Duke now and really college basketball as a whole. We talked about this on the episode with Jeff Goodman the other day, but like Coach K is so much more than just a head coach. Like he is both the heart of college basketball in a weird way, but also like its biggest villain, its most powerful figure, and its connection between the NBA from Team USA. Like there's so many NBA All-Stars that even didn't play for Duke, but can relate to Coach K and look up to him and respect him. And it kind of ties the bridge between the game of purity of college basketball with those guys that go to the next level. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens with him out now, because as you're already seeing with like Overtime Elite and all these leagues, the top guys don't really care about college anymore. And that's fine. Like, that's always been a threat, but there was always entities that were important to college basketball that would find their way back to those types of players. That with Coach K now out of the game, I'm really curious to see who's going to step into that role. Could it be John Calipari? Is it, some really young, fresh face that is just coming to the radar? It's not going to be like Jay Wright or Tony Bennett or any of these other guys that have won national titles. So it's a strange time for college basketball. But to pivot to your second question about Tom Izzo, I do think we're going to see the remaining names that are from that era on their way out here in the short term. And by short term, I mean sometime this decade. That's not really short term, but you got to think Jim Boeheim will be maybe the next to go, kind of the string of the ACC guys. And, people make jokes about Juwan Howard, whose name is in the rumor mill of going back to the NBA right now. And Michigan fans keep saying, well, not until his sons leave. That might be the right way to look at this for Michigan State. We've got Steven Izzo on the roster. I have a really hard time believing Tom Izzo would leave the program while his son is still on the team, and his son's not going to be off of the team out of nowhere if he was given that right in the first place. So I think you've got a minimum of what? He's got 3 years left.
I think it's 3. Yeah, I think it's the first.
And then I think, could I see Izzo hanging around for 6-7 years? Maybe. I mean, we know he's really stubborn. We know he's competitive as all get out. And if he's still chasing that second ring, I wouldn't put it past him. But I do think sometime in the next 5 years is what I would predict. And that just so happens to work out with the guy who I would like to see as Michigan State's successor's timeline, which would be Mr. Drew Valentine over at Loyola Chicago.
I got to give some shout out to your buddy there for sure. That'll be interesting for me to see. I think, we always discuss about kind of the blue bloods, like who's a blue blood, who's not. To me, the definition of a blue blood in some regards is the ability to sustain one of your best or all-time coaches coming through the program, and for somebody else to be able to carry the torch on with the succession. And we've seen that at UNC. We have not seen it at Duke because K really is the program like you spoke to. Kansas has seen it. Some of UCLA, some of the bigger programs have seen some of the torches passed. And so it's going to be very interesting for me to see what happens with John Shire. I know that there's been some chatter that he's always been heavily involved in the recruiting. When you have basically the godfather, as you said, of college basketball behind you, it's pretty easy to wield the power, okay? So is he going to be, Michael Corleone, or is he going to be, what was the younger brother's name? I can't remember it off the top of my head. Anyways, Fredo, perfect. Or is he going to be Fredo, where, all this power that he thinks he's wielding, it really was coming from his dad the whole time. So I'm very curious to see what happens with that. I think at least initially there'll be continued buzz for that. But if Duke doesn't continue to win, it's very easy for a program that was propped up by a single coach kind of carrying on this tradition and this legacy to go back to a very, above average program rather than an elite one. And so that'll be something to monitor. UNC is in the same boat with Hubert Davis. I think Michigan State is going to have a serious question about that. I would assume, as I said, that DJ Stevens is going to be the guy that gets tapped in it. It seems very clear with Fife moving on. Stevens has always, kind of quietly been there in the waiting, the wings. I think given the fact that Tom Izzo, in my opinion, will choose his successor, that it's pretty clear that that's who's going to be tapped in. I don't know necessarily 100% how I feel about that, because I just honestly don't know what he does on a daily basis. I think the program has kind of always kept a bit of a tight lip about what goes on internally. And so I'm very curious to know exactly what his role has been during the course of, the last, I think 15 years, maybe plus for them. I'd have to go back and look. So it's something that'll be interesting. I don't think we have to worry about it just here and now. But it is going to be something to monitor, just these other programs that are kind of starting with a fresh new face, and what Michigan State will maybe end up eventually when Tom Izzo does decide to hang it up.
Yeah, and not to cut you off, but I think it will be fascinating because you're right. I think Stevens is the expected successor. I think Tom Izzo is going to have an enormous role in choosing whoever steps into that position, which could be good, could not be good. Obviously, you want Tom Izzo to have a say in things, and you want him to be around the program for as long as that man's alive. But is Dwayne Stevens that guy? I don't know. And like you said, it's hard to see behind the scenes. Stevens could come in and be great. I think the big thing for me when we get to that point will be how many former players are vocally, outwardly advocating for Dwayne Stevens. And if it's everybody, then sure, you jump on board and you give it a shot. If it's not that many, then I think you're still waiting. Okay, did Nate Oates get a call? If Loyola's become, a Sweet 16 team a couple more years in the next 5 years, did Drew Valentine get a call? Because there will be big time candidates that are available. And that does surprise me a little bit that like with Duke and UNC, they just went straight to the alum former player, and that can work. But a lot of these big brands aren't really throwing their hat in the ring for some of the biggest names in basketball. And that fascinates me.
I think so too. I think there's something to be said about continuity, but I also think that there's something to be said to ensure that when you are passing your legacy on to somebody, that they're fully capable of being able to carry it on to the next level, right? I think what we saw with John Beilein is Howard was able to come in, and it remains to be seen if he'll be able to exceed that and win a national title. But could that have succession gone any better? Not really. And for Michigan State to just automatically tap Stevens without having at least a fair process of evaluation for a guy like Nate Oates, for possibly Drew Valentine if he continues the success, I just want it to at least be a realistic search, because if you don't get this right, Michigan State can go from, a borderline blue blood is how I always have viewed them, just a step down for some of the elite programs, to one that maybe is a little bit more middle of the pack. And that can happen really quickly. I mean, we saw it in football. Obviously, we didn't have the level of sustained success as we have under Tom Izzo, but it's something to be a little bit scared about. And, I hope that he hangs on for at least another 5 years. I would really like to see this class through. But it kind of takes me into my next point, which is recruiting for this particular class. You hit a home run the class before. Obviously, some of the possible decisions in the 22, Boache ends up reclassifying. He goes to ASU after decommitting. Amani Bates obviously not coming here. And now we're seeing kind of the method that they're bringing into this next class. And I'm a little bit concerned. And my initial thought is they just haven't cast a wide enough net. I know that there's been some joking among Michigan State fans about the way that Howard has gone about his business. He basically has offered every 5-star since he got there. And that's an interesting method. It doesn't always work, but he's cast a wide enough net where he's able to bring in the number one classes last year. Now he's heading into this next season. He's probably going to have 5 or 6 guys. He's going to bring in my opinion, at least another top 10 class, if not top 5. And so for Michigan State to continue to keep up and eventually bring home that national championship, the second one that's been elusive, you have to continue knocking these classes out to finish your career. And the way that it's currently shaping up, I'm a little bit concerned about where this class is headed. And so let's just touch briefly on that. There was 2 visits last week, the first of which is one of the guys that I'm highest on in this class is Terrace Reed Jr., 6'9", 7'4" wingspan. They measured him when he came to Michigan State. He's a guy that to me has always been pretty high in the program. I've spoken with him basically since they made the original offer. I did an interview with him. I think that he's a guy that just fits into the program. He spoke about the type of coaching that he wants. He wanted to be pushed. He wants to be uncomfortable. He said something like, I want a strict coach. Well, there's no better place than Michigan State. He's started picking up some recruiting offers. Michigan actually offered him. He's been offered by Kansas. He's kind of blown up a little bit. I think that he probably is an early fall guy that'll commit. I feel good that Michigan State got the first official visit in there. So he's a guy that really have to monitor, because if they don't land him, I think the class could really go sideways quickly. The other guy that came and visited last week was Trey Holloman. I am a fan of Trey's game. I like the way that he plays. He's got good vision. He's got extreme length. I think that he's going to be a high-level defender wherever he ends up. It does not make any sense for me personally, or really for him in that regard, to bring another point guard onto this roster with already 3 guys, 2 of whom are going to be here at least another probably 3 years, if not maybe 4. So I don't really understand why they're kind of going hard at him. He's 6'3". His elbow comes out a little bit on the jumper. I'm not really sold about the shot form. He's mostly like a downhill guy. Basically, to me, he's kind of like an AJ Hogarth type, and rather than, some of the power, he has a little bit more length and athleticism, but for the most part, he's a below the rim finisher. He's not a guy that I think can play off the ball. I don't really understand adding that when you need basically 2 wings, a shooting guard, a power forward, and a center. Like if you're filling 5 spots, though, that's the biggest category there. So I know you want to take, another ball handler. We've seen it go. But getting another guy that can't play off the ball, to me, doesn't make a ton of sense in that. So we'll have to see kind of how that goes. But then you look at kind of how the rest of the class is. Traudt has come out. He's coming for an official, I think it's like in 10 days or so. So not this week.
He was at Nebraska this weekend, right?
Yeah, he was at Nebraska for official this weekend. I think he's coming the 17th, I want to say. So he's coming maybe in like a week from Friday or Thursday, whatever it is. He's a guy I really like, but he came out with his timetable for when he thinks he's going to commit. It's not going to be till after he takes some official visits during the season. It looks like January, February is what he told 24/7. So that's a guy that you're probably going to wait on a while. In my opinion, Jalen Washington, who's a 5-star out of Indiana, who's I think got stars in his eyes for Purdue. Michigan State feels like they're in a pretty good spot for him. But they may be a runner-up on that. I don't think that he's a guy that's going to commit right away. And so some of the options that they're really hard on are going to wait longer into the cycle. So for me, they really need to lock down Terrace Reed. I think Jaden Schutt is a guy that's very high on their board. He's the only real shooting guard they've offered in this class. They haven't really offered a wing. I think Isaac Traudt can play a little bit of that wing role, a 3/4. Offensively, he's a 3, but I think defensively he's a 4. But they haven't really offered anybody to replace Gabe Brown. I think that Michigan State's going to have to be extremely aggressive in the transfer portal, because if for some reason Terrace Reed doesn't come to Michigan State, I don't really like their chances in the majority of the guys that they're in after, except for maybe Jaden Schutt. So you're going to put yourself in a position where, you're going to maybe have to fall back on B or C guys, none of which they've really, have recruited that hard. And if you look at the way the 2019 big man class, and you miss on, 2 of those high level guys, Isaiah Stewart and Carey, what's his first? Vernon Carey. Mm-hmm. And no offense to Julius Marble, but Julius Marble was a way backup plan. And so if for some reason Michigan State swings and misses on this class, I just don't love the feel. I know the transfer portal has changed it, but if you want to get that second national title, you need to be stacking classes. And I have some concern heading into this. Do you have any thoughts just generally about where you'd like to see the shape of this class, or what you think the primary need is?
Yeah, you and I agree on most of this. I think the word that comes to mind for me as, putting my Michigan State fan hat on here when I look at the recruiting classes is uneasy. Like, if they hit on the plan A names, I don't hate this class at all. I like Schutt, or is it Schutt or Shoot?
Shoot. Yeah.
I thought it was Schutt. I like Schutt a lot. I love Reed. Reed is like prototypical MSU front court guy. He's super versatile. He's a banger. He is, kind of the dog mentality that you guys all love and you talk about. He would be a perfect fit. And I think you're in a really good spot there. I know you are really high on Traudt, and I trust your evaluations, very, very strongly. So I would believe that would be a great ad, but I don't get the Holloman recruitment. Like you said, the backcourt's pretty heavily loaded right now, just in terms of bodies, and the wing is not at all. We've even talked about for this year, Gabe Brown is, a critical guy that you're almost going to need 30 minutes of, whether he's good enough for them or whether he's healthy or not. Like someone's going to have to play 30 minutes on the wing, and it's a true freshman in Max Christie and it's Gabe Brown. And then you don't really know what you've got beyond that.
Yeah, so behind him. Yep.
Yeah, it's like you need bodies, and I don't think the current board, that even though it's a pretty shallow board in terms of total number of guys they're going after, they're not really at the position that you need the most bodies at right now, which is just a little strange. But this also seems to be a little bit of a pattern. Like when you talk about, okay, we could play the transfer portal heavily, right? They've got some open scholarships right now, and they, to my knowledge, haven't been going after anybody to fill those spots. I think, we make jokes about Howard, and I make jokes about Juwan Howard's approach. I think it's hilarious when big name coaches are in every single recruit in the country's, final 10 list. Like that works for some programs. It doesn't work for others, but that's never been the Tom Izzo way. And it definitely wasn't the John Beeline way. But I can tell you from someone who followed those classes really closely, when you get your plan A guys, that's totally fine. And it usually works out really well. When you don't, you end up with a bunch of last minute backup plans that are 2 to 3 star types. You threw out Julius Marble as a name, just that people are going to know as an example, but you don't want to have 3 or 4 of those at multiple positions. And like you said, you've got to stack classes. You just landed a great one of the best ones in the last decade. Now, how do you build on that?
Yeah.
And, you built on the last time this happened, you built on Cash, you built on Ward, you built on that entire class, Bridges, with Jaren Jackson.
And Tillman. That's
Tillman.
a ridiculous class. That ended up being a really nice class.
Right. And so that I think is what you're looking for. And I think, even if you land the 3 targets that we named, I wouldn't necessarily consider that as high of a ceiling class just because there's no Jaren Jackson in it. But it's still a class that you can win with. You can contend for a Big Ten title with, barring you landing those 3 guys, which remains to be seen.
I get that he's always been selective, right? He's always been a guy that he wants to make relationships. He takes his time about it. It's gone well. But when you're running into a situation where you potentially have 5 open scholarships and you're really only after 5, 6 kids, to me, that's just not wide enough. You didn't cast a wide enough net. And he knows, more about basketball than I'm going to forget. But I hope that at the very least, the plan would be, if I can't land these guys, it's because I'm going to be aggressive like I was in the early part of this offseason and going out and identifying guys and bringing them in through the portal. Because if you land on Schutt and Reed, I think that that's a really good base for your class. I'd love Traudt to be part of that, because to me, that's the dream class for me. It's Schutt and Traudt and Reed. And if you landed those 3 guys, I think you're in a really good spot. I think that you have 3-4 year guys that you can really build on. In my opinion, maybe all 3 of them have potential NBA upside, but it's going to take a little while for it to develop. So I like having that because you're kind of building a foundation for there, which you did with the last class. But if for some reason you only land 1 or 2 of those guys, then it starts getting a little bit suspect, and I'm going to be a little bit worried about it. So we'll see what happens. Some big visits coming up. The official visit for Traudt. I believe Jaden Schutt's coming in at the same time, so it'll be nice. There's a little crossover there. Hopefully those guys gel. It'll be very interesting to see.
Can we quick talk about Terrace Reed's wingspan and vertical leap? I mean, we got to mention it.
Yeah.
Huge. What a freak.
7'4". I mean, the film that I watched on from just this past season, because I watched a lot of the sophomore clips when we made the offer originally, and his junior clips, I think that he's really spent some time on his body. He looks much more explosive around the rim, both finishing and defending it. I'm just, for how much Marble kind of embodies a lot of what we love about Spartans, he just has not really shown defensively the ability to be a rim deterrent. And we've always kind of gone after undersized-ish bigs. For whatever reason, Michigan grabs 7-foot white giant men, and we grab 6'8", power forward center combos. And it's worked out pretty well for us. Don't get me wrong.
Hey, that's a new thing too. I'm used to decades of Jordan Morgan trying to bang with Derek Nix, and that didn't exactly go as Michigan fans would have hoped.
Yeah, so it's just nice to see a guy with extreme length, with some athleticism, with some physicality. I'm all on board the Terrace Reed Jr. train. I really hope that they pushed all in on him this weekend. I would love that commitment as the first one, and it would make me just feel much better about the whole class. So we'll have to see how that goes.
That trio of Schutt, Traudt, and Reed, while they're different in skill sets and they're different positionally, versatility-wise, they're also 3 guys that you throw in and you plug in on the wing, right? Whether it's at the 4, whether it's at the 3, whether maybe even Schutt can drop down and maybe play a little 2, that solves the glaring need that you and I agree on of we need bodies at the wing. And while that would be an ideal class just off talent alone and fit, I think positionally that's really what Michigan State needs.
Yeah, I like Trout's versatility because he's probably going to play more on the wing. When I looked at his film, he really gave me some Joe Wieskamp vibes. I don't know if he's going to be able to shoot it quite as well, but he saw double teams his entire season. He was really the only guy on his squad. So he shot 37%, I think, on the year. All those shots are coming off the dribbles. He's not getting catch and shoot jump shots. So what happens when he's put into a system where he's like the third or fourth option and he's getting looks? They made the pitch to him to kind of be the Joey Hauser prototype. And I know it wasn't exactly, a glowing season. We'll get right into that. It's a nice transition. But I think that the way that they tried to use him on the perimeter, on the block, from the elbow is exactly how they could use Traudt. And Traudt is a significantly better athlete, in my opinion, around the rim, a better above the rim finisher. And a guy that I think is really, really exciting. I will have to see with his recruitment. I'm not going to hold my breath because he's kind of spread out everywhere, but I think that Michigan State has at least made a pretty good connection with him and his family, and I think that they have a shot. So I'm curious to see how this visit goes coming up, I think, a week from this weekend. But let's transition right in. We might as well start with Joey Hauser because I think if you were to pinpoint maybe one guy who had perhaps the most disappointing season out of anyone outside of Rocket Watts, you're probably, as the fan base, going to say him. And when I went back to kind of dig into some of this, and you wrote the article on him, I think there was a little bit more surprising success than we thought. I know it didn't always show, and perhaps from beyond the arc, he didn't quite have the season that we thought he was going to. But he shot extremely well from inside the arc. They kind of moved him around in a few different spots. Why don't you touch just briefly on what you thought when you were digging into him and kind of where you think that his game can grow heading into next season?
Yeah. So first of all, subscribe, SpartanHoops.com, read the full article, go get it. It's the premier place. You already know the SpartanHoops.com plug. But I was excited. I wanted to write the Joey Hauser article when you asked me who I wanted to write about because I love Hauser's skill set, and I wanted to take a deeper dive personally into why things didn't work last year because I think you're right. Expectations were through the roof for him, among other guys. Him and Rocket Watts are the two that come to mind. And while Watts was an enormous disappointment, it seemed like everyone's perception by the end of the year was also that Hauser was a complete failure, and I don't think that was the case. I think he underwhelmed from where expectations were, or maybe hopes were, maybe that's a better word, but he was not horrible. There were stretches of the season where he was actually very productive. And then there were large stretches of the season where that disappeared for, I think, reasons we can really point to that likely will change going into next season. One of the things from that article was breaking down his season into 3 separate sections. And you can look at the numbers from it was non-conference play. Then it was, I believe, the first 8 games of conference play. And then it was the remainder of the season. And in non-conference play, competition questions aside, he was phenomenal. He was rebounding at a ridiculously high level for a power forward. He was making shots at a really high percentage, very similar to his Marquette clips. He was even doing a little bit of playmaking. Like I think he had 4 assists in 4 of those 6 games. And, yes, there were teams that aren't Big Ten teams there. None of those teams ended up making the tournament. But let's not pretend Duke didn't have talent last year. Notre Dame, while not a good ACC team, still had high major guys that were recruited by big programs. So I came away from that not saying, okay, Joey can win at a MAC level, but can he do this at the Big Ten level? I think it's pretty clear he can. We just need to figure out why it wasn't consistently there the remainder of the year. Part of it to me, I think, is probably, he was one of the first names on team scouting reports. And I think the point guard play really affected him because he wasn't getting the open catch and shoot looks that he was getting at Marquette. He was either taking some off the dribble or he was getting really contested looks. And Synergy broke down a lot of those numbers. On his open looks, he shot at the same clip he did at Marquette. But on contested looks, he fell off a cliff. And some of that's on Hauser because if you dig deeper, he can hit contested shots at a high clip. He didn't do that last year. He did do that a bit at Marquette. And the team certainly needed him to do more of that last season. But I think, adding a guy like Tyson Walker is going to take so much pressure off of a guy like Joey Hauser. It's going to create him more open looks, but the quality of the looks is the biggest thing, right? Like Joey Hauser's still going to play his 20 minutes a game minimum. He's going to get his 6-7 shots minimum. And if these are the open shots that he's proven over 2 full college seasons now, he hits at a 40% clip, then I think his numbers look a lot more like what everybody hoped. If they're a mixed bag again, where, you know, he's taking some late shot clock shots and he's taking some stuff with a heavy hand because you just don't know if you swing it back to a point guard if you're going to get a better look, then it might be more of the same. But, you know, I think he's capable is the biggest thing that stuck out to me from the research I did. And I also think, you know, as you've mentioned, he's very bad. He's poor defensively. That's not going anywhere. That's not something that, you know, a ton of time in the weight room is necessarily going to change for him. But pairing him with the right defensive pairing in the front court can alleviate some of those concerns. And, you know, Thomas Kithier's out of the program. I don't want to shit on a kid, but he's going to be paired more with Marcus Bingham. He's hopefully going to be paired more with Sissoko. And those are 2 guys that can really make up for some of his deficiencies there. So I think I said this at the end of the piece, not to give too much away, but he's my pick for a bounce back player of the year. I think he's capable. I think this season you're going to see a version of Hauser that people hoped for last year. And I would urge Spartan fans, don't give up on this kid yet, because he's very capable of being a secondary guy on a really good team.
I so agree with that. I'm glad that you phrased the article that way, because when I was coming into this, I was a little bit forlorn about the whole situation. Like, he was talked up as if, you know, he was the next coming of one of the best shooters we've ever seen, one of the best playmakers, you know, Izzo's ever had at this spot. And we didn't really get to see that much of it. I agree with you that if you're looking up and down the roster, the one person that probably was hurt the most by not having a primary playmaker at the point guard spot was Joey Hauser, because so much of what he does and what he's really good at is on these like drag pick and rolls as a trail man, as a guy that, you know, is going to get open looks when the guards on the rotation are capable of drawing a crowd and having him be able to be sitting on the perimeter and hitting open shots. I really think that that's where he's at his best. He was actually really good at the rim last year. One of the best players on the team. He shot 66.7% on 36 shots. I thought that, you know, in the post, he was one of the better players that we had too. There's not exactly a go-to post guy, and he showed the ability. He's got a little baby hook with either hand. He can get all the way to the rim from the perimeter. I just think he's an extremely versatile piece. And the one point that you made, which I was just sick about the entire season, was the fact that he was paired with Thomas Kithier, who has the same type of athletic and defensive deficiencies as he did. And despite the fact that, no, he's not laterally all that quick, I do think he was banged up in spots last year. He caught a couple knees in the thighs, in the knee area. I don't think that he was 100% healthy throughout the whole season. But I do think that if you pair him with a rim protector, his defensive rebounding was, I believe, for guys that played above 10 minutes, the second best on the team. Bingham was like 23.8%. He was a 22.1% defensive rebounder. That's really, really good. You pulled the numbers, and I thought that that was really interesting. You kind of took a look at some guys at various points in their career. Joey Hauser was better on the defensive rebounding side than Jaren Jackson, Matt Costello as a junior, and Brandon Dawson as a freshman. So he did show some ability to contribute on the defensive end. It's just not going to be either as a small ball center. That was a huge failure. I mean, we saw that the Purdue game, the Trevion Williams game, that made zero sense. I just think that because the center rotation was such a catastrophe last year, and he didn't have a point guard, that he really just struggled all around. And I think that maybe he's not going to get any quicker. He's not going to, you know, dunk the ball or block shots. I can't remember the stats that were pulled, but I think that he has like 1 or 2 dunks, you know, in the 2 seasons that he's played. He's not an above the rim player type guy, but I think he's smart. I think that he has decent position. And if he plays next to somebody that can kind of cover up some of those warts and aid him on the offensive side, I think we're going to see a much different player. If you had to take a guess next year at points per game and rebounds per game for him, where do you land?
So much of this comes down to how many minutes is he going to play. And we're going to get to this in just a second. But the difficult part of this is that him and Malik Hall, I don't know how they operate together. I just don't. I don't think it's a good thing for the team to slide one of them to the 3. It would probably have to be Malik Hall in that case. He could be capable. I don't know. I'm high on Malik Hall as well, but I don't think you're ever going to see a Tom Izzo front court with 2 guys of that size and stature. There's going to be a big center, and this team needs a shot blocking center. So does that leave you with 40 minutes to split between those 2 players? Because there's a lot of good that Malik Hall brings. Malik Hall on his own is going to deserve 20 minutes, and I think Joey Hauser is going to deserve 20 minutes. But I think the best version of Michigan State next year is one that has Joey Hauser playing closer to 30 minutes, maybe 25, just to be safe. And if he does see at least a 5-minute uptick from last year to this year, I don't think it's out of the question for him to get closer to maybe 12, 13 points a game, maybe 6, 7 rebounds a game. And I think, this team is replacing a guy in Aaron Henry who did so much from a front court spot, right? He was the leading facilitator. He was the leading go-to scorer. He was a volume guy in a variety of ways. And replacing that is a humongous burden, and it can't all fall on Tyson Walker. As much as we both like Tyson Walker and think he's going to be great, I think you need multiple guys who are skilled offensive players that can chip in there. And Hauser, to me, is the obvious answer. I think he has some playmaking upside in the front court. Like you said, Henry led the team in post-ups last year. Yeah. Those got to go somewhere, and if they're going to go anywhere, I think Joey Hauser is the place I would start. So I think, I guess as a baseline for me, let's call it 12-6, 25 minutes a game. But I could honestly see that even going up a little bit. If he has the year, I think he can.
I like it. Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point, right? Because Hall is such an integral part of this team. I wrote in the article that I did on him that if I was pegging a guy to kind of take some of the leadership role that's vacated with Langford and Henry out the door, and I guess to a certain degree Foster Loyer, even though it wasn't always on the court, I think that Malik Hall is a prime candidate. I'm sure that some fans are aware of just kind of what has been going on with his father. He's unfortunately has early onset, I believe, dementia or Alzheimer's. And, he's really losing his dad and the guy that he knew. And when you go through something that's that emotional and that is that, I don't know how I want to word it, but is that it makes you grow up quick, right? He was a kid a couple years ago, and now he's going through a situation with his family where you really kind of have to be a man of the family. You really kind of have to, kind of hold down the fort for your sister and your mom during this type of situation. And I don't think that there's a more mature player on that. And Malik Hall, to me, is going to be a guy that I think gets tapped in to be a captain. And so what does that role exactly look like for him? I think that when we were looking at last year, Joey Hauser was predicted to be a guy that was going to play pretty close to 30 minutes. And we were going to really wonder how Malik Hall was able to grab his own. He actually increased his minutes slightly, played 17 and a half. And I think that continues to increase this year. So I think that the best version of this team, like you said, offensively, clearly has Joey Hauser instead of Malik Hall. But I think defensively, the versatility that Malik Hall can give you, he really ended up becoming towards the end of last season the primary wing defender. The guys that he was guarding, because Aaron Henry had to carry so much of the scoring burden, were the primary guys on the other team's wing. He did a really nice job on Franz Wagner. He played E.J. Liddell. He saw some time on Wieskamp. I mean, he really saw a variety of different guys, and we cut some film kind of showing the various sizes and skill set that he saw. I really thought he took a very large step in the right direction defensively, and he's a guy that's going to have to play because who is the wing defender on this team now? I know that the conference in general lost a lot of the upper tier wings to the NBA, but I think to a certain degree, some of the good teams are still going to have some wing forwards that you have to be able to guard. Are you really going to rely on Gabe Brown, who hasn't quite shown that ability yet as a defender to this point in his career? Are you going to ask Max Christie to do it? I don't know where exactly you're going to do it. That's quite a bit of length on the wing, but you don't have a guy that you feel comfortable throwing out there and saying, this guy can make life absolute hell. So for Malik Hall can be that. And then the question becomes, what can he be offensively? He really has shown flashes, but it's been in very small sample sizes. I believe that he's only had, I think, 5 or 6 games where he ended up scoring above double-digit points. He's got 3 career games where he scored 15 plus. Obviously, the Seton Hall game, everyone's very fond of that one because of the shots that he hit and just the early point in the season. And then he played against Maryland twice, once his freshman year and then once last year in the Big Ten tournament where Michigan State was on the verge of getting blown out. He ended up finishing that game with 19 points, 8 for 12 from the field and 5 rebounds, and basically saved them from a blowout like destruction. So he's a guy that maybe hasn't always turned that mindset. And for me, that is where he needs to take the step this year. It's not physically, it's becoming more aggressive offensively, because I think he showed a nice ability to get to the rim from the perimeter. He showed a little bit of post game. He needs to increase his 3-point shot maybe just a little bit. But I think that, again, he's going to benefit from having Tyson Walker give him some more open looks. If he can take the step offensively, I think that, he's going to warrant at least 20 minutes per game. So that's I kind of see it as an even split.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be, which I don't know is ideal. I mean, to me, the preference here would be for one of these two guys to develop in some sort of way, whether it's offense, defense, or both, that they become you can't really take him off the floor for 20 minutes a game guy, and they inch closer to that 30 milestone. I think they're both capable. Like, I wish there was a path for either of them to potentially get to 30 without necessarily limiting the other. I just don't know how you really do that without going against the entire grain of Tom Izzo's ethos as a coach. I had a quick stat on Malik that's interesting to me. He's never played 30 minutes in a game in his career. He played more 20-minute games in his freshman season than he did in his sophomore season, which may speak to the belief in Joey Hauser, at least early or through the stretch run of that. I think Malik ended the season with 3 straight 24, 23, then 26-minute games. So it seemed like he was the guy they trusted down the stretch. But yeah, there's a lot to like with Hall. I mean, he's got intangibles. He's a heady guy. He's smart. He seems like a very program guy, a good leader. And a lot of what I like about Hauser offensively are skills that Malik Hall has shown flashes of. So if he does put it all together because of his defensive upside, I mean, to me, he might even leak out in front of Joey a little bit from like a highest potential package. I just think that I keep coming back to Hauser, being that we've seen him do this before a bit at Marquette. And albeit he was playing with a guy in Marcus Howard, who was one of the most prolific point guards in basketball, and that made it easy on him. But I think like that production we know is there with Joey Hauser. Malik Hall, even though he's shown flashes, is still like a 5-3 guy for the majority of his career. So I think if I had to place a bet here, I love to place my bets. I'd put my chips on Hauser. And I think what makes this a fun conversation is, am I right in thinking you'd put yours on Hall?
To who's going to give you more offensive production or who's going to play more? Because I think that's 2 different questions, in my opinion.
Yeah, how about let's frame it like this. For the best case Michigan State season, who ends up playing more minutes between those two?
Oh, man. That's so tough to me. I mean, I guess if you look at it this way, to me, it's the minute allocations are going to be pretty equal. I just don't see how it's not going to be. I think the pairing of who they're playing with matters to me more than exactly who ends up playing more. Like, I think very good scenario for Malik Hall would be like an 8 and 6 guy, right? And I think Hauser has probably a little higher ceiling than that offensively. So I guess my thought process is, who are you going to trust down the stretch, right? Who's going to play in crunch time minutes when you need a big bucket? And Hauser did give us some of those this year. I just have to see Malik Hall take that step offensively and become an alpha on that side of the ball, because I think he has that defensively. I don't know if he's shown enough of that. What I said offensively, I meant defensively. I'm sorry. He has that defensively, but I don't know if he's shown that enough offensively to be able to say very clearly, like, he's going to be the guy you're leaning on in crunch time to play. I don't know. I know that's a waffling answer. I'm not sure. I can't predict it because I want to see what he looks like and what his mindset is coming out of this. If he's tapped as a captain, and whether he comes off the bench or not, because again, I think it makes a ton of sense to pair Hauser with Bingham, and that should probably be your starting front court, in my opinion. You start with offensive punch, and then maybe you bring Hall off the bench. I just want to see him come in, and if he ends up coming off the bench in that second unit, playing aggressively at all points in time, hunting his own shot until he turns that corner mentally and takes it upon himself to be aggressive offensively. Then the best version of this team is probably with Hauser out there. But I will put the caveat that if he comes out and he looks like a different player on that side of the ball, that I reserve my right to be able to change my mind in the early non-conference part of the season.
Hey, it's your show. You reserve the right to make the rules here. I respect it.
All right, well, let's transition out of the power forward spot. I think we're pretty close to feeling the same way about the minute allocation and just what's going to happen in that power forward spot. I guess let's briefly tie it in a bow. I would say overall, the power forward spot was kind of an up and down position last season. Do you feel like with the right growth and with the right pairing now and cutting some of the fat out of the roster, that the power forward spot can be one that becomes a position of strength next year?
Oh, man. It's a tough question. I don't think the four, to call it just the four, I don't think the four is ever going to be labeled as a strength of this Michigan State roster. I just don't. Even if Hauser has the bounce back year that I think he's very capable of having, I don't think we're ever going to look at this front court and say, this is a great front court or this is an imposing front court in the Big Ten, even, to be honest with you. I think so much of what we just said with Hall and Hauser relies on the guys at the 5 spot. And the difficult thing for me right now, as I project for next season, is that the guys at the 5 spot, and I know a lot of it was Thomas Kithier, but the guys at the 5 spot were not very good last year for Michigan State. And by result of that, the guys at the 5 with the pairings with the guys at the 4 were not very good for Michigan State. And the other position that wasn't very good for Michigan State last year was point guard. And there was major upgrades to the roster this offseason that now make me feel very optimistic about the point guard spot. The only change with the roster in the front court is that Thomas Kithier has left the program. Which I
think is big. I don't think it should be understated.
Yeah, you're right. I think, it remains to be seen. Was that the only problem? And I suspect that it was the largest problem that Kithier was starting games and playing 11 minutes. And just the fact that you had a 4-man timeshare was never something that was going to help anyone there. But I still don't think I believe in the personnel between those 5 guys to ever be, a top 25 front court. I think if this team takes that step to where we both think they're going to get next year, it's because you're going to see some really dynamic backcourt play. And it's because you're going to see better pairings just of fits together between guys like Bingham and Hauser. I think Sissoko and Hauser makes a lot of sense. And I think Hall and Marble makes a lot of sense. So I think they'll be better, but I guess to answer your question, I don't think that will ever be a strength of this team, barring we use one of those open scholarships on a front court guy, which never know.
I don't think it happens. I just don't see it. I think the reason why I say that Kithier leaving the rotation shouldn't be understated. In my opinion, it wasn't so much his fault for playing, right? He got the time that he got. That was fine. It was the fact that he was taking away from the development of the other guys on the rest of the rotation. That was my largest thing. The ceiling of what Kithier was going to be able to give you was never going to be as high as any of the other 3 guys that were in there. And so the fact that you continued to play him and basically, Marcus Bingham played 0.8 minutes per game, more than him, is just absolutely absurd. And I know he finished the stretch playing, quite well and playing, I think, just under 18 minutes per game the last 5 games, I believe. But that just took so long. The rotation took so long to get to the spot that it needed it to. And this is what I'll say about the front court. Offensively, is it ever going to be a strong suit? They just don't have a guy, in my opinion, that's probably going to be ready this year. I still am extremely high on Matty Sissoko. We'll get to him in a minute. I think that he eventually can develop into a two-way guy because of all the options that kind of like were actually posting up. It really was Julius Marble and him. He didn't get the ball a ton, and probably some of that was just that he didn't warrant the trust at practice and the various other locations to be able to do it. But he was physical and posting up all the time, whereas Marcus Bingham isn't a guy that you really wanted to ever play with his back to the basket. He actually did not play too well in the post-up situations. In the article that we wrote, we kind of showed out some of the synergy numbers. He's much better as like a diver cutter, and he spent a lot of the season kind of in that short corner. Well, the short corner becomes extremely dangerous when you have a guy that's at the point guard spot that can get all the way into the lane, draw a crowd, and then flip you the ball over. Again, the front court is going to be so beneficial from guys like Jaden Akins, from guys like Tyson Walker. Point guard position matters so much for the 5 spot, and when they didn't have it last year, when you're generating a lot of points over the top in lob situations, and that's really what you have in both probably Sissoko and Bingham, you need a guy to be able to break down the defense, and they didn't have that last season. So I think that there's a jump to be made. Is it ever a super sexy, like a Hunter Dickinson where you can go dump the ball into him and get 2? There's not that guy on the roster. I just don't see it. But I will say this. I think that defensively, which is important in my opinion, because of what you have kind of in the backcourt and potentially kind of surrounding the rest of it, especially if Hauser has a nice bounce back season, like you said, there could be 3 guys in the backcourt, and then you mix in Hauser that shoot 35% and up from 3. Tyson Walker has averaged that. I think Max Christie, in my opinion, has the stroke to be able to shoot upper 30s. Gabe Brown shot 40% last year. I think Hauser can return to 40%. You could have 4 guys that can all shoot the ball. You have a dunker in the middle of the spot, and you have a guy to anchor the paint. And I think that given the fact that we don't really know how that wing defense is going to be, having Marcus Bingham manning the back line is really going to be beneficial, and I think that Sissoko brings it too. Just the one issue that I had with the way that the rotation broke out for Bingham is they constantly have been harping to a certain degree on, we need you to be better defensively. We need you to keep your feet. We need you to block shots. We need you to defensive rebounding. He did all of that last year, and I pulled stats from basically all 3 seasons. And what I found was against high major opponents where he played 18 minutes per game or more, he has averaged 7.3 rebounds per game and 2 blocks per game. Those numbers are extremely good. He's just needed more opportunity. I think that he's going to be in the driver's seat this year. I think it was a travesty that he wasn't earlier on the season. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic about Bingham giving us 18 to 20 minutes per game of really good defense, and defense that can change the course of this team's trajectory, in my opinion. I think with Miles Johnson out of the conference, he has the ability to be the best defensive big in the conference. And I know that that's probably a crazy statement, given the fact that he's played 11 minutes per game for most of his career. But that is how I feel. What do you think about Bingham? Where do you see maybe his upside? What's his upside to you?
Yeah, so before I go anywhere near there, we have to acknowledge the fact that you just said super sexy and Hunter Dickinson in the same sentence. And I know you've exchanged DMs with Hunter Dickinson, but this is a family program, DK. Let's calm it down a little bit. So I think you're right on everything you said. Like, it sounds nuts to say Marcus Bingham has that upside, but he has that upside. He's always had that upside. The question is, why hasn't he gotten there? And I don't put it past, any sort of Michigan State player, front court, back court, anywhere. I don't put it past guys to make late career jumps and develop like crazy, because that's what this program's been built on for 20 years now. It happens. So I'm not going to be surprised if Bingham breaks out and hits the 20-minute milestone. I think where my skepticism still is with these 5 guys is that we just talked about it with Hauser and Hall. That's going to be a timeshare because positionally it has to be. At the 5, we need someone to break out. And I say we on behalf of Michigan State fans everywhere. We need someone to be a 25 to 30 minute a game guy. And could you pass?
Not on the roster.
Right. And that's the problem is it passable to have Bingham play 20 and then Sissoko play 10 and Marble play 10? Yes, it is. But then I think you still run into the same similar issues you did last year. And as much as we harp on Kithier, rightfully so, he played 10 minutes a game last year. Like there were still 70 minutes where for whatever reason we weren't getting high quality front court play. And like you said, a lot of the time with Bingham, I mean, I think he's the one you can point to the most where he was giving us quality play. Why wasn't he playing more? And I don't think there's ever been a good answer for that. And, now the biggest answer for it was Thomas Kithier. He's gone. So if all of a sudden we snap our fingers and opening night, Bingham's played 22 minutes, then yeah, I think we can alleviate some of those concerns. I just don't know that I even expect that at this point because it's been so obvious for a year plus that I don't even think with Kithier gone, it's a guarantee we're going to see that. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up a 15-15-10 split. And if that happens, I think the front court's still probably a big negative for the team.
I think that he's got to play 18 minutes per game at least next year. And if he doesn't, it's a failure on the program, in my opinion. I was really, really skeptical about the potential return for his senior year, to be dead honest with you. I had spoken to some people close with him. During the course of the season, I know that there was mutual frustration on both sides. I think that he did grow up last year. I thought I saw signs of maturity in him. He needs to take that final step as a senior, but he also needs to be given an opportunity. And I tried to kind of flesh out some of that in my article. I think that both sides have been at fault. You can't tell me that Marcus Bingham has given 110% every offseason, because if he did, he'd look a lot different. He kind of came into this program as the guy that probably had the highest upside on the roster. He still does have NBA potential. I know that's a crazy thing to say, but he moves reasonably well. He's extremely long. I actually think that he has a soft touch on the jumper that Izzo did not let him explore and probably is not going to in college basketball. He's not ever going to be a back to the basket guy, and they needed to shrug off that image that, you have to be built in a certain way or physical in a certain way to do it. I think that he did show some signs of having some dog in him. He needs to get stronger to be able to finish around the rim. I just think that this is it. We've said it like almost every year, and I know it's like obnoxious to continue to say like, this is the year, this is the offseason, this is the year. But something's got to click. Something's got to click for both the staff and for him. He's got to buy in 100%, and the staff needs to finally say, like, you've paid your dues. You've paid your dues. Same with the Gabe Brown situation. You've paid your dues, and now you get to just be who you are on the court. And I think he just needs a little bit more rope, and we'll see an extremely confident player. And he should get the start, because for guys that, have had kind of some up and down parts of the season, I think mentally he needs to be seeing himself as the starter. And I think that it'll blossom from there. So who knows what'll happen with the rotation.
One thing on Bingham real quick. Yeah. I'm sorry. So I think you nailed it you did nail it in your article. Everybody go read that. The way you broke down how both sides have reasons why this situation has played out as it is was very eloquent. I think you're right. I think he has to get a little longer leash. I think he is going to be forced to get a longer leash, whether or not he deserves it this year, and that will probably bode well. However, we're talking about a guy who is a center who has shot on his career 184 attempts, 42% from the floor. Even last season, he was at 50% field goal percentage. And for a guy that you expect to be like a rim running big, that's really, really bad. So I do think, is that just entirely because of his body? I don't know. Is it because mentally, maybe, does he have the strongest IQ on the court? I don't know. I'm not trying to project anything negative about him. Just that the production has not been there, other than the shot blocking, which is his one transferable pro level skill that you just pointed to. But I think there's more to it than just, okay, Bingham is the guy now, because if he was capable of being the guy last season, I think he would have been given the leash to be the guy. The staff is not stupid. As much as everybody likes to make jokes like about random decisions they've made of guys over other guys, the staff would play a guy that's that capable. The question is, will they play a guy that's capable in one way, but limited or a negative in a lot of other ways? And I don't think we've seen that with Bingham. I think this year Bingham has some to prove in those areas. And if he does, then I think you're right. He makes a jump. Maybe it's a 20-minute, maybe it's 25 minutes. I don't know. That's the best case scenario for this team. I think we both agree there is Bingham somehow gets there. I think you think it's or a little more likely than I do that it will actually play out.
That's fair. I think that defensively, I feel comfortable with what he's capable of bringing. His 12.6% block percentage last year, if he would have played 40% of the allowable minutes, would have placed him in top 10 in the entire country. And I think maybe 1 or 2 in high major. Like, the guy is an absolute force on the defensive end. He's so long, his ability to get his hands on balls and steals. He's just such a unique prospect. And I think that you have to live with a little bit of the offensive uncertainty. For a guy that really changes the way that you play defensively, let him take a fucking 3 every once in a while. He got pulled that one game. That drove me nuts. He took the 3. He came down and he actually stole the ball back after he took that shot and he got yanked. I don't get that. Like, he's never really had a long leash. He's never had the trust of the staff. And I'm just hoping that this offseason it comes to fruition where there's just a mutual agreement of ways to let him be himself and for him to show the staff that he deserves it, right? That he's worked hard enough to be given the ability to just be who he is. And I think that if that comes and everything goes, that there is some upside there. The other issue that we run into is, the Julius Marble effect. He ended up starting, I think, 9 games, and Bingham only started 5, I think, on the whole season. For the small amount of Julius Marble scoring like a little bit better than Bingham, I think he was 4 points, and Bingham was like 3.5 on the season. He is by far, out of the 3 options, the worst defensive option and the worst defensive rebounder. I think it was besides Malik Hall. I'm pulling up the stats right now. Well, obviously Kithier, we're not going to include him in there. No, he was. So behind Kithier, he was the 2nd worst defensive rebounder of the 5 front court players. So Malik Hall, Joey Hauser, Matty Sissoko, Marcus Bingham were all much better defensive rebounders. I think some of that has to do with some of his athletic limitations. We talked briefly about it. He's 6'8", 230 pounds. To me, he's really much more of like a traditional power forward type. I think that he's shown actually pretty nice touch on the jumper in a different roster, in a different situation with availability at the power forward spot. Maybe he could have evolved into a little bit more of a Kenny Goins guy, where he's just kind of like a solid guy that can hit that little elbow jumper his junior year. Obviously, he eventually stretched it out. But I thought that maybe there was more of a role for that, but the roster doesn't allow for it. So he's forced to play center. He's a little undersized. He doesn't quite have the length. And I think that what we saw last season is, yes, he got better as an individual defender, but you can't be as bad as he is defensively trying to anchor the paint and play more minutes than a guy like Matty Sissoko, who in my opinion is probably coming up really hard behind him. So for how much, we've said, is Bingham going to really be the guy next year? Who's the other option? That's the thing. And I know that this is what makes you skeptical of the front court in the first place.
I have an answer.
Yeah, who's that?
This might surprise you. I think Sissoko is the other guy. And I think he brings similar things to what Marcus Bingham brings. I mean, I think Bingham's upside is way higher. I'm never going to argue on Marcus Bingham's upside. If Marcus Bingham randomly puts all of his upside together this year, he could be a 3rd-team all-conference guy. Like that's where he is. Maybe that's even a little low. I don't know. Like you said, he could be an NBA guy if he really hits. I just am so skeptical it's ever going to get there because all we've seen is flashes of that potential. Mm-hmm. Now, it's easier for me to buy into a guy showing flashes of potential when you show them in a freshman season and not in a junior season where you play 12 minutes a game. I think Sissoko to me is a lob threat finisher in a way that Marcus Bingham might not ever be, despite being a freak athlete. I think he's just that imposing, powerful, physical force that if he can just catch and hammer down alley-oops that Tyson Walker gets to the lane or Jaden Akins gets to the lane on, I think there's a role for him that reaches out towards 20 minutes a game this year. I think, the Illinois game is what everyone remembers from Sissoko's freshman year, which is ludicrous on its own. But, he was ready for the physicality of that game, which, to go flip side on you, when Illinois went to Ann Arbor, nobody from Ann Arbor was ready for the physicality of that game. I don't think that's something to scoff at all. And I think, to me, I was going to flip this on you and ask you, but to me, for Michigan State to hit their ceiling, obviously the ideal dream scenario number one is Bingham just becomes a whole different guy. But I think it's a lot more likely that Sissoko might actually make that jump this season. I've never been high on Marble. I actually think it might be better for the team if it became closer to like a 20-15-5 type split and Marble ends up with the 5 for all the reasons you just laid out. But I would say, let's be hopeful. If you're Michigan State fans, cross your fingers that maybe Sissoko's the guy that makes the jump, because I think it's more realistic that happens than Bingham puts it all together.
That's fair. So, I thought the jump was going to happen for Mady Sissoko his freshman year. I did. I thought by the end of conference play, he was going to be a guy that earned maybe 15 to 20 minutes per game. I think some of that was me just diving into highlights and diving into like the highlight reel type stuff where he's just dunking and blocking stuff. And I didn't do a deep enough analysis into actual game film to see. I think when he first started the season, he looked like, like a baby deer out there. I think one article I wrote that he looked like a baby giraffe, just all arms and legs, and, he couldn't put it together. I thought that he progressed quite impressively during the course of the season. I mean, obviously he's a completely physical specimen. I've long said that in terms of just the raw piece of clay that Mady Sissoko is, if this staff can't turn this guy into an NBA player and just an absolute monster on both sides, then the staff has lost it, because physically, athletically, I think that he has really good hands. He catches the ball extremely well. I think he has good timing instincts and when to jump, both defensively as well as on offensive rebounds. I think the point that you made in terms of physicality, he went toe-to-toe, and it wasn't for very long minutes, but with Kofi Coburn, with Luka Garza, with Hunter Dickinson, he played against all the conference's best bigs, and physically he looked at home. I think he had some flashes. I want to say maybe it was the first half of the Indiana game and maybe one half, I think maybe the first half at home against Purdue, where he really, really looked good. I think one game he had maybe 5 points and like 5 rebounds in like a 7-minute span. And then they didn't play him the second half. And I thought that part of the reason that we kept running into these situations is they just didn't know what to do. 4 guys was way too many guys. They didn't know what to do with the rotation. The trust was given to Kithier, and they stuck with that way too long. I don't know. I was flabbergasted the entire season about the way that the center rotation broke out. But I am with you. I think that Mady has more upside clearly than Marble. Does he have as much upside as any of the front court players on the team right now? That's possible. I'm curious to kind of see where it goes, because I think defensively he can be a pretty good shot deterrent. I think he can be really good. I think he's going to be the best defensive rebounder like he was last year by the numbers. Obviously, it's a limited playing time, but I think that he brings that, glass cleaning ability. I think he can run the floor a little bit. We didn't see it a ton last year, and Michigan State has really kind of missed that in a big since Nick Ward has exited the program. And so can maybe he give you a little bit more of that? And then in the half court, he's got to find a role, right? I think that's the thing that you alluded to. If you can get him in the pick and roll and get him rolling to the rim, if you can find a way to kind of create some space for him to get to the glass and finish. We just don't know. The sample size was so small that it's really hard to predict what he's going to be. But I think having a full offseason of both the weight room and conditioning as well as just learning, right? I mean, it's such a learning curve. He's only played basketball for 5 years. He spoke no English 5 years ago, and now he's learning somewhat complicated concepts on both sides of the ball. So I think that there's a lot to be hopeful for him. And I think that you're right in the fact that if, there's an ability to kind of have a breakout guy in that, hopefully Bingham reaches his potential, but also Sissoko coming and maybe stealing some minutes from what I would assume is at least early on a 10-10 split between him and Marble will possibly increase the trajectory of what this team can be next season. So I'm with you. I'm all aboard the Matty Sissoko train. I have been for a long time. I'm just hopeful that he continues to put some more of that game together and we see kind of a greater stride in that department. I guess let's turn to just how you see the minutes, being allocated. I mean, we kind of have touched on it a little bit, but where do you see the minutes being allocated? And let's say that, Sissoko ends up stealing a couple minutes here and there and finishes the season with like 12 minutes per game. What do you see his production potentially being?
So I think if he plays 12 minutes a game, that's tough because you're just throwing him in a similar situation to like what a Bingham or a Marble was in last year. It's hard to put any sort of numbers of relevance up without hitting at least like the 15, 20-minute mark. I would hope that I think for Matty, he continues being around a 60% from the floor guy with a little like higher attempts. I think he only scored like 27 points all of last season, if I'm remembering correctly. I think he's going to get more opportunities just as a lob catcher. Is he going to diversify his offensive game at all? I don't know. I guess we'll see. You would hope so. But like similar to the Hauser conversation, I think these centers are going to get better looks just off being large humans that can catch a basketball and slam it down. Like Matty Sissoko can do that. I know that sounds stupid, but like those opportunities weren't really there in the past. And they were back when you had a Cassius Winston. Obviously you had some better, 30-minute type Xavier Tillmans around then. But yeah, if Sissoko hits 12 minutes, I'd like to see the field goal percentage stay around 60. I'd like to see him getting, maybe 4 rebounds a game. And then you hope maybe he goes 4 points a game at that point. But I think to me, you got to hope like this becomes a 2-man thing. Like what front court really has a 3-man timeshare these days that goes well? Like Bingham or Sissoko needs to be a 20-minute guy. The other one needs to be a 15-minute a game guy. And then you fill in the cracks with however you want to play those final 5 minutes.
I agree with you. I don't know if I see it. That's the only issue because Marble is going to be an upperclassman and we know the deference that's given in the program to that. For how much I kind of have bemoaned what Marble brought to the table, he also was a victim of completely erratic playing time last season. He scored 21 points in 24 minutes the first few games. He played Duke, where he had 12 points in 12 minutes, 5 for 5 from the field. And then he backed it up with a 9-point performance against UDM and really, I think, kind of put that game away. They got a little hairy for a minute. And then he went on the next stint and like played 15 minutes over the next 3 games. Like it just didn't make any sense. And it's so hard to clearly identify what these guys potentially can be when none of them got consistent playing time really except for Bingham down the stretch.
So this is the hard part though, is like, both of us are sitting here saying like we believe in these guys, right? Like there's 3 guys that theoretically could be very good players, but how on earth do you get there without just choosing 2 of them? You know what I mean? Yeah. And like this reminds me almost, again, I always make the Michigan comparisons in the episodes, but this reminds me of the Mark Donnell, Ricky Doyle, Mo Wagner front court, where you didn't know what Mo was at the time. You just knew you had these 3 centers that had wildly different games that were all pretty mediocre as far as production goes. And they gave you mediocre production for an entire season because they all played 12 minutes a game. And then finally, the next season, it was like, okay, Mo's the 25-minute a game guy. And that's because he made some really big strides. But like, you also had Ricky Doyle transfer and Mark Donnell graduate at some point to get there. Like, That's where it's almost like we talk about addition by subtraction with a couple different guys on this team. Like 3 centers is the number you need. We just need to really make it 2 that are the rotation. And I don't even care which 2 it is. I think Marble would benefit like crazy if he was just given 15 minutes a game as the full-time backup.
Yeah. My only issue with that is who's got the higher upside out of the 2 of them. And to me, it's so clearly Sissoko. Even even if Marble was to reach his full potential, defensively, it's never going to quite reach the level that I think Sissoko can give you, particularly, again, on the defensive glass and is a shot deterrent. So, is his upside offensively so high that it outweighs his defensive deficiencies? And I think the answer to that is really no. So in a perfect world, I agree with you. I think 18 to 20 minutes to Bingham, and then, you play close to 15 minutes a night for Sissoko because he's the future, right? He's the future of where you're going to go. The issue that you'll run into, and it's not just for this season, but for next, is if you end up splitting time between these two guys at 10 minutes a pop, then you head into next season. Let's say Bingham doesn't want to stay for a fifth year. He goes. You're going to have zero idea what you have at the center spot heading into next year. And then, maybe you get one of the freshmen that we talked about, one of the commits to come through. That's a very uncertain front court again. And Joey Hauser could maybe be out the door. Malik Hall is still there. But, the front court could be very, very uncertain heading into the next season. And again, I understood the thought about maybe adding one extra player as somebody consistent to the front court. But then you run into the situation where, again, what do you have and how would you play him and how would the minutes work out? So I guess we have to rely on the staff again to be able to figure this out. They've never had so much trouble with the front court in my recent memory than that. Usually it's two guys, it's a 20-20 split, or if you got a Xavier Tillman who's just an Iron Man, you can play him, 25, 28 minutes per game is ideal. But this is going to be very fascinating, and I think that this maybe can't be a strength. I think it's so tough because I've kind of come full circle on this, because when I was doing all the articles, we're digging all the stuff, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? If a couple guys take leaps, the front court can be something that we can lean on a little bit more this season. But now that we've talked in a circle about it on this podcast, and there's nobody that we know can consistently give us a two-way player. And I think that is the biggest thing that maybe this whole front court situation is lacking. Yeah. It's a guy that can give you both sides of the ball in an extremely effective manner.
Dude, if you could Frankenstein a guy at the 4 that has Joey Hauser's offensive skill, Malik Hall's defensive package and leadership, and then Frankenstein a guy at the 5 that has Matty Sissoko's physicality, Julius Marble's offensive back to the bucket game, and Marcus Bingham's defense, then you're golden. That's a great front court. But the problem is you got to always have just 2 of these 5 guys on the floor. And Marble doesn't work with Hauser. Hall, does he work with anybody? Probably. He's probably the guy that could play with any of the centers. But it's just such a dicey maneuvering roster of those 2 spots. And my last question to you to put a bow on this is, of those 5 guys, if you had to pick one that was most likely to hit 30 minutes a game in conference tournament play next season, who would it be and why?
Oh my God. Well, none of them are going to hit it, so we'll just get that out of the way. But if somebody was to hit it, man, it would be one of the 2 power forward spots, but I don't think it's just not gonna happen. And we might be lucky to get 25 minutes out of one of those guys in the spots. And I think that probably is one of the largest issues with the front court this year, right? There isn't one consistent option to give it to us. So
I thought I could tease you into saying Bingham for that answer. Was 30 too high?
Way too high. If you would have said 25, maybe
25, maybe. So my answer to that is Joey Hauser, because I think I think there's a clear path to something close to 30 for Hauser of just he becomes a very great offensive player. If he is that, and I think you find ways to pair the right defensive guys around him. Center wise, I don't know. I was hoping I could get you to squint and say Marcus Bingham, but apparently not.
He's averaged over his career is under 10 minutes, I think, is the first season, whatever. He's played 2 seasons in a row. So you weren't going to get me to do that. But I will go on record saying that if he doesn't play at least 18 minutes per game last year, that it's a complete travesty. I'm going to be disgusted with the whole situation. Unless Matty Sissoko is the one who steals those minutes, okay? Let's be very clear.
So when it's a 15-15-10 timeshare, you and I can come out here and gripe all season long.
I'll pull out my hair before the season's over if that's the case. So I don't know, man. I think that, when we get into the backcourt, which we're working on now, we're starting to write some stuff in, and we're hitting the hour, 20-minute mark. So we're going to wrap up here. But I think that there's a lot of excitement for the pieces that fit together, if that makes sense. When we're talking individually about the way that the front court is shaped, yes, there's a lot of question marks. But I think to a certain degree, because of some of the additions with the freshman class coming in, with Tyson Walker, with what is still on the roster, I think that there is like the greater parts and pieces could make up a sum similar to maybe how the 2018-19 season evolved. And this is something I'm going to explore kind of as we get closer to the season. I want to maybe draw some parallels between what this potential roster could be. Nobody knew Cassius Winston was going to be Cash that junior year. I mean, we saw some flashes, but I don't know if anybody really predicted that he was going to have like a All-American National Player of the Year type breakout season his junior year. I think we all thought he could be an extremely high-level passer and a really good three-point shooter. But when you looked at that roster between 2017 and 18, and you saw what you lost with Miles Bridges and Jaren Jackson and just the NBA talent that was leaving the roster, I thought to myself to a certain degree that the pieces that were coming back next season maybe just fit a little bit better. And obviously this season was not how we wanted it to go, and the pieces didn't fit together at all, and the roster was just a mess, and the rotation was a mess. But I think that because some of the fat was trimmed and because some of the guys that needed to go left the availability, and really there's no other option but to play some of these guys that have long been deserving, in my opinion, of the chances, like a guy like Gabe Brown, a guy like Marcus Bingham, that I really see to a certain degree maybe the pieces finally all coming together. And so I'm going to remain a little bit cautiously optimistic that they can kind of put it together. And a lot has to come together with the point guard spot, obviously. I think that's the primary one. But I kind of like all the pieces in the ways that they potentially fit if everything goes as we want it to go heading into next season. So I'm going to leave that little tidbit there. So appreciate your time as always, Greg. Again, you can find him at GWizzy12. You can find me at Spartan Hoops _DK. I'm your host, David Klein, for my co-host, Greg Waddell. Thank you so much for following along today. I appreciate everybody. Take care.
Thanks, TK.